Today's episode is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. Tax season is here, and that means that it's time to file your taxes. There's good news. If you're a W-2 employee, you can save half off your tax filing. All you have to do is call the Tax Defense Group before April 15, 2020, and mention that you saw this ad on UCast Studios. Millions of Americans will get money back after they file, and you can be one of them. Call the Tax Defense Group today at 800-850-7973. That number again is 800-850-7973, and you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. Another sponsor for today's episode is Writer Junkie. Are you looking to make more money in 2020? One of the best ways to do it is by having a new resume that can help you get that dream job. Writer Junkie offers affordable, well-written resumes for the low cost of $145. They'll even throw in a cover letter for no additional charge. All you have to do is mention that you saw this ad on UCast Studios, and they'll get right to work. Call Writer Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online at writerjunkie.com. Welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined again by Gary Wayne, author of Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Gary, thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me back to your show, and excited to be back and excited to be talking about the subjects that I think you've got in mind for today.
Well, perfect. So one of the first things I want to talk a little bit about is like the Holy Grail. Obviously, there's been a lot of depictions of it in the media, and there's a lot of talks about it, exactly what it is. Obviously, I think for most people, they think of the Holy Grail as being the chalice that Christ drank from at the Last Supper. And then obviously when the Da Vinci Code came around, the idea of it maybe potentially being the descendant of Jesus became a little bit more prominent of a theory than where it was. Yeah, if you want to kind of talk a little bit about it, just kind of go more in depth.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting topic, and you're correct. It's not what most Christians sort of view it as, with a Christian sort of veneer on the top, where it's the chalice that Joseph of Arimathea would have gathered some of the blood that was dripping off of Jesus on the cross when he was poked with the spear. And that's sort of the Holy Grail that most people look at, but that's kind of the superficial aspect of it. And not to lend too much credibility to what the Da Vinci Code was talking about, because I don't want to get people to get trapped into relying on a fiction or, work of fiction. But one needs to understand, though, that everything that Dan Brown writes about in the Da Vinci Code is based on Gnostic belief system and Gnostic history. So the story in there is sort of a story based on facts, but it's a fictionalized account. So I don't want to dismiss the idea that there isn't another meaning to the Holy Grail, because it's a very important meaning to the Gnostic sects around the world. And it has to do with the idea that this isn't just a chalice. And the word Holy Grail comes out of Latin as Sang Graal. And Sang Graal is a play on words for Sang Grail. So the first one is spelled Graal, and the second one is Greal. And now you have a different meaning that's overlaid because it means holy bloodline. And it's also a play on the word sang, S-A-N-G, instead of just S-A-N and R-E-A-L. So S-A-N-G-R-E-A-L, Sangreal, which again, holy blood as well. So it's an allegory in Gnostic belief system that the Holy Grail is essentially a allegory for the bloodlines of a couple of very important individuals in their belief system, as they graft in different bloodlines from around the power centers or the royal families of Europe to produce the royal families. And so this bloodline, as the belief system goes, is the bloodline of Mary Magdalene, who is very, very important to the Gnostics and considered a disciple and has Gnostic Gospels that are accredited to her. And they actually raise her to, the level of Peter or higher. So a very, very important figure. And she marries Jesus of Nazareth. And then in their belief system, they believe that they actually were married at Bethany when Jesus was anointed. And that's what the Gospels of the Bible are talking about with that anointing. But as it goes is Joseph of Arimathea in their belief system, took Jesus down from the cross, which he did as recorded in the Bible, but before he died. And even Pilate, they'll use as their credibility for the story, was surprised that Jesus had died that quickly. And so the concept is that he took him down and nursed Jesus back to health afterward. And so that he never really resurrected, he just sort of disappeared, and he escapes away and then hooks up with Mary Magdalene, his wife, later, and they produce Grail children. And this is the Grail that Joseph of Arimathea takes to Glastonbury. And there's some stories and different children in between, but the short version is Josephus is the third son, and he's the one who is going to lead the family because of death, and one goes into more of a monastic life and isn't going to have any heirs. So Josephus would receive a title that they would call the Daviddom in their belief system, which is a play off of David and a title like a Caesar. So look at it from that particular aspect. So Joseph of Arimathea takes Josephus to Glastonbury, which of course is very, very important in Celtic history and King Arthur and Grail stories. So, and there is given lands and protected by the Celtic kingships. And from Josephus, he's going to intermarry as a bloodline of the royal bloodlines of Israel, going back to David, is going to intermarry into the Celtic Pendragon kingships that eventually will produce King Arthur, which, the Holy Grail stories are based around. So this is the story of the bloodline of the survival of Jesus' son and Mary Magdalene's son as it marries into the Celtic dynasties, and then that bloodline will cross over to the Merovingian dynasty as they lay it out through Aragon and Amenabad. So Aragon will come out of the Camelot dynasties. Amenabad is part of the Merovingian dynasties, and that's where you have a scioning of two great dynasties. So you have all the extraordinary bloodlines that go back to fallen angels and Nephilim on the Merovingian side now being intermarried into the bloodlines of the Merovingians, just as those bloodlines married into the bloodlines of the Celtic kingships who take their bloodlines back to the Tuatha De Danann, or the giants of the fairy people, and to and in that tradition, the Tuatha De Danann are the offspring of the fairies that come from other planets, aka fallen angels. So same basic story. So you have that imagery of fairies and dragons that are overlaid as part of understanding the bloodline and genealogies that are mixed into the Holy Grail story. So the Holy Grail is a symbol that sort of opens up this door into another room of doors that you can go down so many different channels. I think I'll leave it there and let you back in because I've covered a lot of territory already.
Okay. You saying then, so that do you believe that the Holy Grail actually, it is the descendant of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, or are you just saying that that's kind of what the Gnostics believe?
It's certainly not my belief. It's what the Gnostics believe. And what's important to understand about that is it's what the Gnostics and the secret societies and the royal bloodlines are wanting to do with what they believe and are doing with what their belief system is. Whether or not people want to accept it or not, they believe it, and they track their genealogies all throughout history. And the higher the pedigree and the ennobling through scioning of bloodlines raises that pedigree, is where they fit in that whole sort of culture. So they will, track these bloodlines to fantastic ages into prehistory, whether it's accurate or not. It's the records that they have, and it's what they base their divine right to rule on. And, it's interesting, Prince Charles, who, obviously the Windsor dynasty comes out of the Hanover dynasty in the I can't remember the other one, that German dynasty that they intermarried into, and they changed their name to Windsor in World War I to separate from what was going on with the Kaisers in Germany. But they also have bloodlines that, have intermarried with the Stuart dynasty. And what's really, really interesting, where it sort of intersects here in terms of some of the Pendragon imagery that's in the Celtic lore is that Prince Charles is on record, and I can send people links on that if they want to get hold of me, but he is on record in saying that his bloodlines also go back to Vlad the Impaler, who is a dragon as well, and who Dracula was based on. And it's this is not by coincidence. The allegories in terms of the bloodlines and their genealogies, they track. So Prince Charles says he has bloodlines descending from Dracul and Dracula. The A would be the son of a dragon, and both of them were part of the Ordo Draconis, Order of Kings on continental Europe. Then I would take at face value that at least they believe that, and they have records, whether or not they're legitimate records or not, that will verify that.
So to the Gnostics, I guess the idea of there potentially being descendants of Jesus, I guess alive today, I mean, what significance do you think that has to them? Like, do they look at that as a positive or negative thing?
Oh, they look at that as a very, very positive thing. So they don't look at Jesus as a son of God status. They look at Jesus as a prophet status, and he's a lot like Hermes or a Confucius or a Buddha or somebody like that, who's sent along the way to help humankind evolve into godhood, as the belief goes. So you'll hear the term Gnostic Christians, so they believe in Jesus, and he's a significant part of that Gnostic sect, but not as Christians would identify Jesus as the Word who came from God and went back to him. So they lower him to a level, but they recognize he has bloodlines that goes back to the Davidic kingship, which is very, very important in that cult of bloodlines and genealogies. And it's important for them in terms of what they believe is going to happen in the end time. And again, all the religions have a version of the end time. All of them have Messiah-type figures, and they have a similar apocalypse by fire. And that's where all the different accounts out there sort of intersect in directionally as to what's going to happen. But how it exactly plays out, that's where it falls into different sort of vernacular or local traditions in terms of the religion or the areas where those traditions come from. And so they're looking to present their Messiah figure in the end time. So they've already in their belief system, in the Gnostic belief system of the West, have degraded Jesus to prophet status. So he's not the Messiah. He's important, but he's just a prophet. And so with the signing of these bloodlines, they are wanting to present a pedigree of bloodlines as part of his credibility and resume to be the Messiah, which will include the bloodlines of Jesus and Mary Magdalene and the bloodlines back to certain giants and Nephilim and certain gods or angels. They also graft in the bloodline of King Saul. And King Saul, it was the first king before David, even though his monarchy didn't last all that long, and the Davidic monarchy replaced it. But King Saul has a royal bloodline, and they scion and graft those bloodlines in as well, and that's an important understanding in their belief system. So they track, again, according to their records, Mary Magdalene as being from a Benjamite, which King Saul was, and that she comes from that sort of royal descendancy with genealogies, and through Benjamites who were dispersed and went up the Danube and into the Rhine, and then intermarried with the Merovingian dynasty from that way. So they've got two different avenues where Benjamite bloodlines are being grafted in. So they've got both of the Israelite monarchies in there. And what's important about this is that Joshua, at the time of the covenant, he grants Jerusalem to the Benjamites as their inheritance forever. This becomes an important title that's called the King of Jerusalem title. And we see that first surface in the sort of the modern era in 1118 on a small priory on a rock of Zion called the Abbey de Notre Dame. You have Baldwin, who's related to Godfrey de Bouillon, and is crowned in this temple as the first king of Jerusalem. after taking Jerusalem that the Crusaders do. And of course, this is the beginning of the creation of the Knights Templar, not from poor knights, but from royal bloodlines, understanding that Hugh de Payan, Anjou, and de Bouillon, the three sort of more important ones, take their bloodlines back to the Merovingians, the last survivor, which is Dagobert. A battle partner who's not listed in there is Henry de St. Clair, who takes his name with the settlement of the Treaty of the Norse taking Normandy in 911 with the St. Clair Treaty, as it's called. And this becomes the St. Clair transliteration of the families that migrate after William the Conqueror takes over Scotland, and you get the Rollo descendants moving into Scotland, into St. Clair's, and they're the ones who take in the Knights Templars fleeing a lot of the adepts and start a new organization called Freemasonry. Where I'm going with all of this is a title that now starts, the King of Jerusalem title now starts to move down through the ages with this bloodline of kings, because for the Antichrist, as a Christian would understand it, or the dragon Messiah figure, as they would call it, that they're going to present in the end time is going to be the King of Jerusalem, and he will receive that title officially as he's crowned in the temple in the end time, that Christians would understand as the abomination that takes place at the 3.5 point of the last 7 years. And so they're going to claim back their title, and Antichrist is actually going to rule from Jerusalem as opposed to Rome, because he's going to destroy Babylon City immediately after being crowned, or very shortly thereafter. So if you follow that King of Jerusalem title, it goes down through the areas of Lorraine, and you get the double cross of Lorraine that's expressing that imagery as two different bloodlines. And that's where the Anjou of the north and the de Payan and the de Bouillon families reigned over, was in the Anjou region. And as the Lorraine dynasty bloodlines intermarry into the Habsburgs, that title follows. So you have the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty that has it. The title is currently held by King Philippe of Spain, son of Juan Carlos of the Bourbon bloodline, who received that King of Jerusalem title through intermarriage and inheritance from the Habsburg-Lorraine title. So you can see that title coming down through history, and I would watch for that title as an indication as to not necessarily who Antichrist is, but of the power and the influence and what they're trying to set up for the end time with those bloodlines, and declaring their divine right to rule out of Jerusalem, and declaring their divine right to Jerusalem as an inheritance.
So then, do you believe then that the person that will claim to be Antichrist, do you think it's possible they might claim some kind of lineage from Christ to Mary Magdalene?
Oh, they will. They definitely will. And for them to make this happen, you have to understand that Christianity is a significant opposition to what they're trying to bring about. So they have to degrade Christianity to a point where they can rebuild it from its ashes of destruction, but they don't want to totally destroy it, because they want to fold all of the religions in under the universal religion of the end time. So that's why we have in Revelations, you have a description, a very odd description, unless you understand sort of the language of what's going on there, where you have a lamb that has two horns that speaks like a dragon, and this is the false religion. So this is the religion that is going to be sponsoring Antichrist. So what they're trying to set up here is the ability to bring out evidence through these genealogies and historical documents and whatever else that they bring out to say that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Because as Paul said, if Jesus didn't die on the cross and was not resurrected 3 days later, Christianity falls, because it stands on a single doctrine that is in fact true. So if you pull the carpet out and prove, at least with whatever evidence that they're going to throw out, I think it'll be falsified evidence from my perspective. But nonetheless, their plan is to do exactly that, and to bring down Christianity and then fold it into the Gnostic cosmology of trying to unite all of the original religions from around the world as a building block to bring about their Antichrist figure. So the universal church comes first, then comes the world government, and then comes Antichrist. Now, Antichrist will be the one who's kind of unknown at a certain point in time, and he's going to be part of negotiating the covenant that starts the last 7 years that brings about the new world order of the 10 groups of nations or empires of world government. But understand the order that they're getting this in, and then Antichrist rises to power through the first 3.5 years and then is crowned at the 3.5 year point of the last 7 years. So yes, it's very, very important that they do this so that they can say that their Antichrist is the true Messiah, and do it before Jesus actually comes back so that they can complete their deception.
So I guess kind of changing subjects a little bit, I want to talk to you about like one of the chapters in your book about the kings of Camelot. And if you wouldn't mind maybe talking a little bit about what Camelot is or what it was, and maybe a little bit of what it stands for, because I think for a lot of people, they're familiar with Camelot from the King Arthur tale, or maybe from a more modern, I mean, if someone's really into history, they might have heard it said before, related to the John Kennedy presidential administration, and they called it, it's Camelot. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind maybe, talking a little bit about who the kings of Camelot were and kind of, what the symbolism of Camelot itself actually means.
Sure. So the Celtic kingdoms out of the Wales area were offshoot of the Tuatha De Danann. So King Arthur, for example, or Uther Pendragon, take their genealogies back to the giants of Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann. And these are the Celtic Pendragons that are ruling when Joseph of Arimathea takes Josephus over to Glastonbury. And these are the dynasties that eventually produce the Camelot kingships and dynasties. And so Camelot is this sort of idealistic kingdom, and it's based a lot on prehistory and of what they want to do. So when we look at Camelot, and we understand that we're talking about giants, we need to understand also about Gnosticism, that they understand they are the beings of light, the children of light, and the enlightened ones and the illuminated ones. So all of these terms are sort of interrelated, whether or not it's political, religious, or through the royal bloodlines. Camelot actually means curved light, and it's a city of light, as they would understand it, or a city of knowledge. And the U.S. is often referred to as the shining city. So it's a city of light that shines, and it's a city of shining ones, which is an allegory for the giants of Sumeria and the Tuatha De Danann, the fairy people. And so all of this is set up as to being, Camelot was located, on top of a high hill as the mythos goes. And so the U.S. is this shining city. And so when I look at the analogy that's going on, and I'll talk a little bit more and bring some more details in on it, but just to give people a frame of reference as to what I'm talking about, the U.S. is the platform for world government. So the term, the U.S. being a shining city on a hill, is basically the term that they're saying this is the model we want world government to set up on, independent states all working together. And it comes out of the golden age, the age of enlightenment, the age of Atlantis, that they're trying to set up. And in Atlantis, you had 10 pieces to the Atlantean Empire that was trying to, through military force, take over the whole world. And it's recorded in Timaeus and Critias by Plato. And of course, they don't succeed. They're actually defeated by the Athenians, according to Plato. But nonetheless, this was the golden age. This was the empire. And this is the new Atlantis that they're trying to bring in for the new age. And so when people hear the shining city on a hill reference, they should raise a little bit of a red flag as to what are these guys really talking about. Now, Camelot is also made up of the word Lot, as in Lot, Norway, Lot, France, and Lot from the Bible. And all of those are important. So Lot, Norway, is where the Viking kings come from and where Rollo descends from, that will produce the De Bruces and William the Conqueror and the Sinclairs, the St. Clairs that I was talking about. And they're going to intermarry into the bloodlines of once they expropriate Normandy in 911. But previous to that, Gawain is also from a lot, Norway, in the Camelot and Holy Grail mythos. And he is literally a Viking, not only a knight, but a king. So the Knight of the Round Tables of Camelot, where Arthur reigns from, is actually a similar analogy to the Lord of the Rings from prehistory, as a round ring, and or the ring lords of the Anunnaki, where kingship was issued out of Nippur, and they operated in a ring or a table of rulers that were operating in the Sumerian mythology of reigning the entire world, at least from that civilization's perspective. And so you have this imagery that's overlaid, and this is the same number of kings as I mentioned earlier, and I'll just throw it in now because I don't think I connected it to the end time, is when we talk about the 10 nations of Atlantis, this is the same allegorical or prehistory that they're overlaying it, that's interconnected with the Sumerian kings, and that number was 10 empires. And in Daniel and in Revelations, you're going to have this world empire sponsored by Babylon. The religion is going to be made up of 10 kings of these 10 groups of nations, trading blocks, spheres of influence, whatever you want to call them. So you have these genealogies that are connected in, and all the knights of the Round Table are kings. They're not just knights. So they're kings of various kingdoms of around Wales, and which will also include, obviously, their partnership with the Vikings out of Norway. And that's why William the Conqueror is going to take the kingdom of England back for the Normans, because the Saxons are the ones who are going to overthrow the Camelot dynasties and King Arthur. So again, a little bit interesting point in terms of how prehistory sort of overlaps on some of these genealogies. Now, Lot in France is the epicenter of the Gnostics and the Templars, and the origination area of the Da Vinci Code, and I won't go into all the details of that. So, but understand there's a connection there as well with that name. But the most important one for me is Lot out of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain in the Bible, from a Christian perspective, they're considered cities of evil, corruption, sexual misappropriation, depending on which one you want to overlay on it. You can overlay several of those sexual crimes, including the crimes of angels, where Sodom is considered to be, by the Gnostics, the second incursion of the recreation for giants by angels after the flood. And Gomorrah, according to the Book of the Invisible Spirit and the Tablets of Seth, was where the giants were created before the flood. And so they look at Sodom as not cities of evil, but of cities of light, cities of learning that were overthrown, just as the world was overthrown, and an age of enlightenment by the evil god of the Bible. So they have that complete Camelot dynasty that is being reflected with its history encoded into the name for people who are in the Gnostic belief system at the adept level to understand the full meanings of the narrative. Now, in the Camelot dynasties, you have at sort of the pinnacle of the Grail stories that are, of course, sponsored and published through the money and the influence of the Knights Templar. Again, not a coincidence, but they're actually overlaying and putting their imagery of the knights back onto the Knights of the Round Table as a Templar type of imagery. So you can see the influence of the Templars in terms of how that literature is being formulated. And you have Guinevere and King Arthur as being the king and the queen. Guinevere is, a name that's related from the fairy or the matriarchal bloodline back to the Tuatha De Danann. And of course, King Arthur is a Pendragon, which is the patriarchal part of the bloodline. So fairy, matriarchal, dragon, patriarchal. And all of this is encoded into the imagery of Camelot and the King Arthur tales.
In one of the chapters in your book, you wrote something about the Trojans and kind of, I guess, a little bit of what ended up happening to them. If you wouldn't mind maybe kind of expanding about the Trojans, and because I mean, I know for a long time there was, I guess, an assumption within academia that Troy actually never existed and that was all just a myth. And then I know that sometime over the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, there's been actual archaeological finds of the city of Troy, and kind of bringing, I guess, kind of a fresh take to the idea that maybe it was potentially not just a myth. Maybe if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the Trojans and how they kind of connect to all of this.
Yeah, and again, we don't know whether or not all of the details as we get of Troy are completely accurate, but there's certainly a certain amount of information that's likely true, and the more things are researched, the more it sort of substantiates what's written, not only in the Bible, but in other accounts from around the world in their history and religions, Troy being one of them. And Troy was this city that was located in Scythia, or in northwest Turkey, and we're at odds with the Greeks and the Greek giants, and also the Troy's area and Scythia area was known to be home of giants as well. Again, all the kingships in prehistory, both before and after the flood, were sponsored by giants, as the genealogies go, that produced all of the royal bloodlines that have descended down through history. But after the defeat of the Trojans, there's a couple of migrations that take place. One is over to England and one is over to France. And so one portion will marry into the French kingships and set up in around the Paris region, and of course Paris is part of the Troy legend and mythos, and that will be a basis for the French bloodline that is going to produce the Merovingians, and part of the Scion bloodlines that the Merovingians have that go back to giants. Another portion will move over to England and to Wales, and in a several level of migrations that are going to intermarry into the Celtic kingships that eventually come to power down the road. And a couple of the giants that are listed that migrate from that area, along with Brutus and Paris and all the other giants listed in, if you understand those as being giants, which I think they were, as migrating out and setting up more dynasties into the new lands that they moved, were Albion, which is a giant in England, and Magog and Gog. And of course, Magog and Gog we get from the Bible as well, where the descendants of Japheth move into the same area of Troy after the flood. And I think they actually take on the names of giants. And in Greek mythology, Iapetus, who I think a lot of the legends about Iapetus are conflated with Poseidon, and Poseidon is the father of Atlantis, who produces the 10 Nephilim kings through Clymene or Cleito, depending on whether or not you're reading the Iapetus version or the Poseidon version. But they also have the offspring of, and also Monmouth also links these giants back to Poseidon as opposed to Iapetus. So you get a couple different versions coming down through history. But Albion, Magog, and Gog were giants from the Celtic area of Turkey that migrated over to England. And even today you have Gog and Magog protecting London, just as London is connected back into Trojan history as well, in terms of where the name comes from. And so these are also the kings that are marrying into the Celtic kingships, and both coming out of Normandy, France, and in the René de Chateau area that is talked about in Holy Blood and Holy Grail and the Da Vinci Code. And in the Welsh kingdoms, they have this one word allegory that goes back to Albion, which is the Elbe gens, or the bloodline of Albion, where a specific branch of them is actually taken back to Albion as the giant that is fundamentally producing that bloodline, just to underline what we're talking about in terms of how they like to track their genealogies.
Because when did the Trojan War, when was that speculated to have happened? Was that, like, I'm not really sure of the timeline. Was that supposed to be like a couple thousand BC, or?
Well, there's two versions of it. One is that by secular history, they're saying somewhere from 1,000 to 1,500 BC, if it took place. I think it predates that. I would say I would give it two versions. One could be that it is actually before the flood, because you're getting giants that typically seem to have a connection after the flood from before the flood. But if giants survived the flood as opposed to a recreation, then it could have happened, shortly after the flood. But I would date it further back into history than from 1500. I would say, within a few hundred years or so after the flood, depending on whether or not you're using secular chronology on that. That would be, 2800, maybe 2600 BC, or in biblical chronology, that would be more like, 2000 BC. And of course, also in the same sort of time frame that maybe, and a little bit after perhaps of when Gilgamesh would have lived. So again, depending on how you want to date that chronology.
And then Troy, I guess for the findings of it, it's been kind of like it was in the Mediterranean, right? Kind of near Greece, or
in Turkey is where, at least where, I can't remember the name of the archaeologist who said he discovered it in the late 1800s, but it's in the Turkey region. But that was heavily dominated by the Greeks as well for a long period of time. So it sort of gets conflated into Greek history and mythology.
Yeah, that's true. And Turkey for a long time it actually ruled Greece. There's probably I guess the two peoples past I guess have intersected a lot. I wanted to talk about one more major topic, and that was in chapter 60. You wrote about the invisible college, and I wonder if you wouldn't mind maybe talking about that a little bit, and also I guess kind of where did we even get the creation of colleges? Was there something unique about their formations in the past? I think a lot of people don't really necessarily understand the formation of especially like higher learning and kind of like a little bit of the history. So maybe if you wouldn't mind kind of talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, and the Invisible College is a very interesting name. And again, everything within the occult history has allegories and history connected to it. And if people aren't familiar with the Invisible College, it's the other name that is applied to the Royal College of England. And the Royal College of England is accredited as being the first modern organization that is going to promote science and education outside of Roman Catholic influence. And it comes into being in 1660 in an official charter by King Charles Stuart in 1662. And it is created by Rosicrucians and Freemasons. So it's created not necessarily by the people that you would want to have it created as being sort of this objective sort of organization, at least from my perspective. But they're doing it, and they call themselves the last of the sorcerers and the first of the scientists. And it's something that is set up so that they get control of the sciences and development and education outside the Catholic Church. And they're going to use the Jesuits that they've set up earlier to do the same types of things within the Roman Church, and I'll come back with some of those connections in a few minutes. And so the Royal Society is the organization that all education systems and scientists report to even to this day. So they're the parent organization in the West. And originally, the Catholic Church is going to put up with this because they're not attacking the church directly, but by the 1800s, they're now moving forward heavily on the evolutionary theory, and all war breaks out between those two again. But understand, this is designed to do what the people behind the curtain, the former wizards or the former sorcerers who are pulling the strings here, they're trying to lead people away from God, to degrade God, not give God credit for anything, and to build things in the honor of the pantheon, just as the liberal sciences come out of prehistory. And so anything that is going to lead people away from God is their primary goal. And so as we look at how this invisible name comes about through the Rosicrucian societies and the Freemasons, This is a name that goes back to the original founders of the number 33 original founders that are called the Invisible Ones. And most people think that the Rosicrucians start, again in the 1500s, and some make them it a little bit later, and they're not all that high up in the hierarchy, but these are made up of the royal families who had the Templars set up. And after the Templars are destroyed in 1307, they need to reconstruct all the different organizations, but they're going to do it in not a centralized version as the Templars were, but they're going to set up Rosicrucians, which are the first ones. They're going to set up the Freemasons with the Sinclairs, and they're going to set up the Royal Society. They're going to set up the Jesuits. They're going to set up the Rothschilds banking, and on and on and on, the Illuminati. But before all of this happens, you have the Rosicrucians, who are set up first and are still a part of the pure blood orders with the 33. And so 33 of these individuals in 1317 are going to meet with the Pope, and they're going to try and create a peace treaty and reestablish the Templars inside the Roman Catholic Church again. And the Roman Catholic Pope says, no, we're not going to quite do it the same way. We're going to let you do that. We're going to reestablish the Templars, but we're going to have all the members. We're going to use your organizational structure with the 33 that you have, but as leading it, but we're going to replace it with our own people. And of course, the Rosicrucians, the bloodlines, they say, no, we're not going to do that, and we leave. And they call themselves originally the Invisible Ones. And these are the ones that are, set up the Rosicrucian Society. And then they need to replace the Templars within the church to do the same thing that the Royal Society is doing within the church, get control of the education, control of educating not only the priests, but all the people who are going to go to Catholic schools, get control of the banking, and they are going to be set up as what they would call themselves as the New Templars when they get set up. But how it gets set up first is that you have Ignatius of Loyola, who's going to start the Jesuit Society in the 1520s, and then he's going to be sponsored in the 1530s by a fellow by the name of Borgia, which is the same name and a descendant of the black nobility of the papacy and bloodlines out of Italy, of other popes named Borgia. And he is the Grand Master of the Contessa Order in Spain, whereby that order was set up in 1307 by the King of Spain to make sure that they control all the assets of the fallen Templars. And so this is the organization that is going to sponsor Ignatius of Loyola. And then in 1537 to 1540, the Jesuits become an official papal order. And by 1570, Borgia, Grand Master of the Contessa Order, is now going to become the third leader of the Jesuit order, and he moves to get control of the banking with the King of Spain, and they get control of the banking, and they've been controlling the education ever since. Now, the Jesuits fell out of power in the 1800s, but then were reestablished with all their powers, shortly thereafter, and have been on the incline today, and actually have a Jesuit Pope today. So the idea that's going on with the Invisible Colleges is to educate people in their indoctrination, both inside the church and outside the church. And all of it has to do with preparing people for the end time. The religion that they originally established to build a bridge between science and religion for the end time was called Theosophy, which is produced by the Rosicrucians, and is the same religion that people would have been familiar with as being Gnosticism, starting with in the 1800s as Blavatsky does the offshoot of Theosophy. And it is replaced after the alien phenomena with Rosalind in the late 40s and the alien thing coming on the scene with the New Age movement. So New Age is Theosophy, and Theosophy is Gnosticism, which is the religion of the Rosicrucians, which was designed to be the end time religion, the New Babylon, just as it's written as New Babylon in the Constitution written down by the Templars by Master Rosalind, and I've got information on that if people want to get a hold of me on it, that they wanted to, from within inside the church, set up the New Babylon, with the Templars, and that's why the Jesuits were called the New Templars, and that's what their role is inside the church: education and to set up the religion of Babylon from within. So when we look at both sides of the coin, is we have to use a critical eye. And I'm not saying knowledge is bad. I mean, knowledge can be good and knowledge can be evil. It depends on how you use it. But we need to lay a critical eye on everything that we're told and dig a little bit deeper so that we have a better understanding. Are they manipulating us or are they not manipulating us?
That completely makes sense. I mean, do you feel like with the Invisible College, I mean, I guess their tentacles, I guess if you want to say it like that, I mean, it's obviously expanded outside of Europe as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. And they have organizations all around the world. And the Chinese have dozens and dozens of secret societies that they would equate on a parallel level. And they've got their bloodlines that come down from the Shah dynasty, that come from the dragon creator gods. And that's the Shah dynasty, which is the Li family. And of course, and again, I've got handouts on documents on how that all comes down through history if people want to get a hold of me, and how even President Xi is from the Li family. And of course, you had a Li before him that they're back in control. So even when the communists took over, they're back in control. So yeah, you've got that reach of these families all around the world, which is why it's going to be a little bit messy in the end time, because they're all going to be competing for control. But you can start to see where and how they're going to establish the bloodlines as running that new Atlantis that Francis Bacon proclaimed in his book New Atlantis as this new age millennium that they're promising, that is, a counterfeit of the millennium in the Bible. I was also going to mention that the invisible ones is also a term that has a far further reach into their belief system. So the invisible ones are their celestial gods, their celestial masters, the great white brotherhoods, the ones that the adepts speak to, that guide them and provide information to them and knowledge to them. So as you move further into the religious side, that term invisible ones is basically telling you that this science is being guided by fallen angels. And what's all interesting about that is where the seven sciences are created before the flood in their belief system from the descendants of Cain, Enoch in particular, who divides it into the seven liberal sciences. That knowledge intermarries or weds or joins with the knowledge from the gods or the fallen angels. And certainly as First Enoch talks about, and certainly we get information coming from the gods in all civilizations around the world. But with the Gnostic version and the Masonic version, you have these seven sciences that are wedding with this illicit knowledge in the days of Noah and Jared, where the giants are created before the flood. And so a lot of people think today that we're getting the same rapid type of advancement in knowledge that brought about the apocalypse by water in the antediluvian age as what is going on today with our knowledge expanding, and that comes through these connections of the sciences, the secret societies, the Gnostics, and the information that's coming from the fallen angels to accelerate that knowledge for the end time.
You kind of mentioned something that, and maybe we'll just cover this one last topic real quick. You mentioned something about the Chinese leaders and the people involved in China, and I guess that's something I've always kind of wondered is when it comes to at least this kind of information that's read about and people watch videos on YouTube and things in the Western world, it's oftentimes very Western centric, where this person, this thing came from Europe or this thing came from America. It's usually one of those two kind of things. But you kind of raise a good point when you start talking about the Chinese and a little bit of their history is, I guess, how do they kind of play into all this? And I guess what are some of their secret societies and kind of who are some of the major players in China that have kind of been running things for a long time? I mean, you kind of briefly talked about the Lees. But yeah, maybe if you wouldn't mind, maybe just, because I know that's a whole other can of worms, but maybe if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving like a glossary, kind of like, the equivalent of, who are the equivalent of the Jesuits, let's say, in Chinese history, or of the Rosicrucians or the Templars, if they have such a group?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question and kind of a big subject. So I'll try not to get people confused here. So when we look at Chinese religious system, you have the ancient religion of Taoism, that's with a D, and it would be pronounced as a T today and replaced by a later version that is called Taoism, and that, of course, that religion comes out of Buddhism as it moves east, and the Hindu religion as it's established in India. And of course, I also show in the book where that actually tracks back to the religions of Babel and how it expands after the flood. So you have that ancient religion that I was talking about that they're trying to unite. And so when we look at some of the different organizations that are over there and understand the Rockefellers, and they meet with these people all of the time. So, or not all of the time, but regularly to track what each other is doing and planning for the future. So I don't know whether some of the people will be familiar with some of these names, like you have like the Wuzhou Society, which comes from the Chinese word Wu, meaning five, or meaning ancestors, and that's the society of five ancestors, and that goes back to their dragon kings and dragon founders. You also have societies that, and I should also mention that these societies are all run by the Li families, and just as the triads are part of that. But I'm just trying to skim through my mind here to see whether I can come up with enough names that'll make some sense. But certainly the Wuzhou comes to mind immediately. You also have the Hung Society and the White Lotus Society, and those were, the Lotus Society was amalgamated itself into the Hung Society, and that which in turn produced the Triad Society, which is the Three United Society. And understand that triads are an offshoot of the secret societies that come out of China and also run by the Li family. So you also have societies like the Red Dragon Society. There are others. I just can't remember all the different ones, but they're all working for the royal families to control the Chinese society. They're on equal to the societies in the West, and particularly regard to the Wuzhou Society. They're well known and known as an equal society to the Masonic organizations in the West.
Okay. Yeah, maybe next time we talk, maybe we could talk a little bit about, I guess, the other parts of the world and kind of maybe, some of their groups and who are, some of their equivalents and kind of, who's who. Because, I definitely feel like from the Western world perspective, there's definitely...
Some of the other names would be like Red Spear Society, as that one comes back to me. Oh. There's another one called the Green Gang Secret Society. Mao was in the Ko'ino-Wei Secret Society that was working to create the revolution. So there's a lot of it. So again, you have to understand China is has a lot of population, so it has a lot of societies.
But let's definitely next time we talk, maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And because like I said, I think that's something from at least an American standpoint is, especially when it comes to ancient history or things that are far back. I think that there's there's not a lot of exploration of other parts of the world outside of Europe and kind of the Western world. So maybe we could talk about that next time. But Gary, thank you so much for coming on. How can everybody follow your work, and are you working on a new book, and when is that new book going to be out?
Well, I am working on a new book. I'm trying to be selfish, and so I'm trying to create more private time to bring it along. But it's not going to be out till next year. And I'll have to be very disciplined to complete it. But it's coming along. People can get a hold of me through my website, Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. And on the website, you can get a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters, so you can get a good feel for whether it's a book for you or not. And you can also get a signed copy through the website, or connect over to the Kindle version to purchase it, over to Amazon or to Barnes & Noble if you want to purchase from there as well. And I also have an email on that website so that if you want to get some of the things, documents on some of the things that we're talking about today, just ask me about the subject area. If I've got a document that I published on that, I will send it to you at no charge. Or if you just want to ask me a question, I will get back to you. You can do the same on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63, and or message me on Facebook under Gary Wayne. That's Gary with one R. And either message me on Messenger or post on my timeline, because it's an open timeline.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you again so much, Gary. I appreciate your time and I look forward to talking to you again soon. We want to thank today's sponsors again, the Tax Defense Group and Writer Junkie. You can contact the Tax Defense Group at 800-850-7973, and Writer Junkie's phone number again was 805-587-7966.